Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by the Wall Street Journal best-selling um, author of over 20 thrillers. He graduated from the United States Naval Academy, received his bachelor in science and English literature. He served the next 8 years on active duty, traveling the world as a naval officer assigned to various Navy and Marine Corps units. His extensive journeys span the globe, including a 2-year tour of duty in Japan, and traveled to more than 20 countries throughout Asia and the Middle East. His most recent novel is A Clean Kill. That's right, it's your favorite writer of mine, Stephen Konkoly. Stephen, did I say that last name right? Because I keep thinking I'm going to fuck it up.
Yeah. No, you got it right.
All
It's a
right,
tough one.
perfect, perfect,
Definitely tough.
perfect, perfect. So, all right, so like, yeah, so let's get into it. So, you got on my radar because I think around the same time, I don't know, maybe around the same time, when I started self-publishing, you, I believe, had also started self-publishing because we had used the same designer, which was a really great designer. Lives in New Zealand. I know that I always call him Jerome, but that's not how you say his name, correct?
Oh, no, it's Jeroen. Yeah, I
Jerome,
know.
there you go.
I always call him Jeroen too, and I still do from time to time, but I have to stop and check myself. Yeah, it's Jeroen. And
So,
he's probably listening right now saying, "No, you guys got it wrong again." So,
So, what was the very first book that you published? Do you remember?
so the first book I published was the one that's kind of behind me with the bright light, the Jakarta pandemic. And talking about Jeroen, I reached out to Blake Crouch because I had just read Run, um, which was one of my, it came out roughly around the same time, and I loved the cover, and I knew nothing about the publishing world at all, and I had created a really horrifying cover, through I think Create Space back then, and it was just abysmal. And I reached out to Blake, and he put me in touch with Jeroen. And then, I've been using him for all of my self-published books right now. Have one of his covers. And if I self-publish again, I would definitely use him. It's been a fantastic relationship.
Now, was that the first novel you had written, or just the first novel that you had published?
That's the first novel I had written. I had I'm not, it's like my journey's a little like a little different. I'm trying to think. So probably started writing, thinking about it in 2009. And I think it was published in 2010. So maybe 2008, I had actually started thinking about it. But prior to that, even being an English major had nothing to do with at the Naval Academy, a bachelor of science in English. I mean, that's the oddest combination you can imagine. It was an easy major, and which is why I chose it. And it really had nothing to do with writing. So I just kind of got at this bug. Like I had a story in my head about a pandemic in a neighborhood, and it's really actually more of a suspense psychological thriller than an action thriller. There's some action in it, but it's definitely not like my other books. And it went through a million iterations. I mean, this thing was 200,000 words in the beginning, a disaster. I mean, a sheer nightmare. And it went through 8,000 edits. And I mean, the book, if anyone picked that book up today, it doesn't even closely resemble what I wrote back then. I feel like I've learned a lot since then, about the business and just about everything about writing.
Well, yeah, I definitely want to get into more of kind of what you've learned over the past, because obviously, ideally writers learn as they go and they
Yeah.
get better, and especially about the business or whatever else. But what got you to that place? I mean, writing a book is, as you know, and a lot of people know, it's not easy. It's definitely a lot of work. Even 20 books in, it's still a lot of work. But at what point, were you like what was the inspiration? What were you reading at that time where you kind of had that bug where you decided, hey, this is something I want to give a try to?
Yeah, I can't, it's funny. I can't really say it was anything I was reading. It was really kind of like it- I mean, I was thinking about writing a screenplay. I was kind of looking into that. But that wasn't really too serious. And then I wrote maybe like 5, 10 pages of something, and then realized that I just don't like writing that abbreviated. And something in our neighbor, we had like I mean, seriously, there was like this kind of flu bug that went around our neighborhood think it was in the summer. It might I don't know if it was a diarrhea book. Could have been anything. But I mean, it took down like half the kids, and it went from person to, it just went from household to household. And it gave me this idea of like, what would happen if a pandemic hit and people just, kind of didn't mentally adjust to the idea of, contagion, spread, all the different factors, that we kind of dealt with, during COVID. And I just kind of started getting this kind of dark idea of, a very deadly virus that no one is really taking, only a few people are taking seriously. And, that was kind of the protagonist who was, worked in the industry and knew about this, knew what was coming and prepared for it. And then the rest of the neighborhood was kind of turning to him, and there was nothing he could really do for them. And it just got, the entire situation got very nasty, with a couple allies. But yeah, it was that was kind of an interest. It was more of an experiment, honestly, than anything. But as I kept writing and writing, I just enjoyed it more and more. And my wife she's my first editor, and we were just doing cuts and all kinds of different, making all kinds of modifications to it. And this is the very, very rough first draft, that 200,000 word one that she cut down to like 160, and it's probably like 95,000 words now. And it would, like I said, it was a bit of a mess, but I just enjoyed the process so much that, after I self-published it, and it sold, it did fine. It did okay. Um, it was nothing. I didn't think I was gonna, at that point I had no grand, delusions about any kind of, career as a writer. But I switched gears and wrote, the first book in the Black Flag series, Black Flagged, which turned out to be Black Flagged Alpha. The beginning. And that book did really well. And I wrote like four more before I kind of stopped that and then switched gears back to post-apocalyptic. So my self-publishing career has been kind of this jump back and forth, because I think I write three or four books in one series and I kind of get tired of it. I kind of have to move on.
Yeah, how many
Um,
series are you up to right now?
I think like seven, honestly.
Seven. So when you start, do you do you try to create a Bible for each series, or at least a very detailed character list, or have an idea that if you want to jump back into a previous series? I mean, how is it difficult to jump from one series to another, or do you find that easy?
So you know what, I do it the opposite. Having a Bible would be great, but like most of my series do build. So like, you have the core characters, and then I keep adding to it. So for me, it makes more sense around book three, four, if I get that far, to actually stop myself for a couple weeks, bring out the big whiteboard and start just like digging into the manuscript and really making sense of like, who's been around, who's still around, what are they, what's their arc, what are some of the subplot storylines. I mean, those are usually resolved in every book, but I have done that for both series, but it's usually later because I honestly I just don't know where exactly they're going to go. I have a vague idea, um, and I do a lot of crossover. So like with my current publisher, I do bring characters in from not my post-apocalyptic side, but from the Black Flag side. So there are definitely some, not too many, but there are definitely character crossovers, which is cool. I think readers seem to enjoy. It's not really an Easter egg because some of them are main characters, or very prominent characters, but there's only one or two, and they're supportive. So yeah, at one point I did a big like Black Flag World. I don't know if it was a post or a big whiteboard thing, and showed how all these worlds kind of integrated in, the timeline. And it's fun, and I'll keep it, I'll keep it going. There are some Black Flag characters that appear in my latest book, just a few, you know.
Yeah. So, and we're going to get to A Clean Kill. I listened to the audiobook somewhat recently, so I'm very familiar with that off, because that's most fresh in my head. But with the previous books, so some thriller writers, they tend to try to, they'll make the current president in the book, the current president nowadays. I mean, obviously in Clean Kill that wasn't the case, but have you ever done that in previous books, or do you ever kind of feel the need to maybe really try to really bring, current events, or is it more or less like, okay, yeah, in the past, George Bush was president, but nowadays it's president, who, you know what I mean? Like it's a completely made up president in the present. Like I'm just, how do you kind of juggle that fact from fiction in terms of these real day or these current day thrillers?
Right. And that's a great question. And I think what I've learned, not the hard way in any way, but because of like, the tension between, different political sides, that I really truly try to steer clear of anything overt in terms of this side or that side. That said, I do incorporate, modern, themes, so like, the Black Flag series, when I think in book three, I had a group that was kind of like the Tea Party, but this is before the Tea Party was even named. And and I did, I kind of backed down off of that a little bit later on. I just kind of identified this and changed, I kind of sort of changed the trajectory, but there's a group in there, and if you really dug into it, and if you really, put aside the action and just kind of focused on nuance, you'd be like, it kind of seems, kind of like this group. But at the same time, there's, I like to balance it out. Like in the Alex Fletcher series, I have militias coming to coming into power in this vacuum, in a lawless United States. But I show them as both, there's militias that are actually helpful and they're trying to restore order, and then there's some that are, you know, they're not so helpful to say the least. And I really try to kind of strive for that balance, and I've done that in, like, especially in like the Thomas and Mercer series. I kind of like to focus more on like bad actors in terms of like black ops, or what would you call them, like kind of corporate mercenary groups, these kind of like that military industrial complex, these kind of above the law kind of situations where like no side knows how to exactly deal with them,
Yeah.
and those groups themselves are the ones that are actually trying to manipulate both sides. So like, it's kind of a long answer to what you said, but I did, like I said, I brought I had the Ukraine issue. I had it in advance in my the Deep Sleep series. So that series, the Devon Gray series, the original version of that at the end was a midnight or 2 in the morning attack, more of a like a decapitation attempt, a helicopter raid against Kyiv, and with the intention to topple the government and just you know put in a puppet government. But as February, once, during February, when it became clear that something was going to go down there, I contacted my publisher and told them, I don't know if this is a great idea. Let's switch the target, and because we have no idea what's going to happen here. And they immediately were like, yes, let's do this.
Yeah.
And turned out to be a great thing, because who knows what would happen. When that book was published, the Ukraine could have been gone.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that was actually something in the green room I wanted to bring up to you if we wanted to get into, I guess, the idea of politics in thriller writing, which is something that for my own thrillers I'm always very conscious of, because yes, you definitely have readerships who are on both sides of the aisles, or they're in the middle. Um, and you never really want to necessarily piss off one side or the other, but sometimes inevitably I feel like it's going to happen, even if you don't really necessarily name a certain group.
Yeah.
They can kind of like, you can kind of people still feel attacked because they're like, well, this happened when that. And so it's always like trying to get that balance, to try to, I mean, because it's supposed to be entertainment. And sometimes, you have your own political ideals. I do, all writers do, but it's that idea. Like, I mean, there are sometimes you'll read a book where they like explicitly will make like, oh, the bad guys or the Democrats or the Republicans or whatever else. And I don't know about you, but for me personally, I try never to really label one party or another, like, oh, it's a congressman or it's a president, but never really, I don't know. But it's just, yeah, just because like that idea about, not trying to really get in there and, you know, because I mean, ultimately, inevitably you're going to get some one-star reviews, probably either way from people upset about it. We do have some comments so far, though. Bennett Wilcox says he still mentally pictures Charlie Thornton as Dale Gribble.
Dale Gribble. I'm not
I
familiar with.
believe that's what it says. And then they also assume Brown River is a nod to Blackwater.
Yes. Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No doubt about that. No, yeah. Dale Gribble. I'm trying. Is that how's it spelled?
Dalegribble.
Oh,
That's what it
geez.
looks like.
Sorry if I can't remember. I mean, it's probably
Keep in
like
mind, Stephen has
several
written a
bits
shitload of
back.
books. And apparently he doesn't keep a list of characters, so he doesn't know who any of these characters are.
But Brown, right? No, he's definitely right. Yeah, but yeah, that's definitely a nod to that. Yeah, yeah. I have some friends who work for them, so I just keep it, yeah, keep it as neutral as I can. I mean, and I've had chats with them. They're laughing about it.
So you had mentioned earlier our mutual friend Blake Crouch. Obviously, he's blown up, and he's always had a really interesting career too. Started out traditionally published, kind of
Yeah,
lost his publishers, did some self publishing, and then he wrote the Wayward Pine series, which became huge because of the TV show, and now he just Dark Matter came out recently on Apple TV. Um, it always finds like Amazon is always trying new things. And so for a while, for people who don't remember, there was this thing called Kindle Worlds, which essentially was their way to try to monetize fan fiction. And so they had brought in a couple IPs or intellectual properties for writers to do stuff. And starting out, they basically hired some authors to write the stories. And so I remember actually being in the car driving home and getting a call from Blake. And I'm like, why is Blake calling me? And he's like, hey, they're doing this thing. Would you be interested in doing it? And I was like, sure. And so I ended up writing this little novella called Nomad. Um, and then we had mentioned before, I guess, in the green room, Brett Battles, I want to say like wrote like 40,000 word, like a short novel. We probably, knocked that out in a weekend.
right.
But other writers kind of wrote some short stories. I remember you well, yeah, talk about yours. I mean, essentially, you wrote like a couple stories, a couple novellas that were linked and that are kind of bundled together. I mean, how did that come about?
Yeah, there was so a very similar story. I had yeah, I can't remember exactly what I was in between at the moment, but it was early summer, and Blake got in touch with me and just asked me if I had any interest in this. And this was, well before you know, I well before I knew I mean I kind of knew about Kindle Worlds, but not really. I was aware of it. And yeah, we just chatted for a little while, and I said, yeah, it'd be great. I'll write a novella. And I based it on David Hassler, who was like an ex-Delta Force guy. So, I figured that's in my wheelhouse, having ex-special forces, kind of like, kind of a hard charger kind of character. And so I wrote the first novella, and then I don't know, I just kept going from there because I did have time on my hands during the summer, and I wrote another one and then another one, and you know they all got published, and it was with Sean Fitzgerald, who worked at Amazon at that time, who was running the Kindle Worlds, who actually suggested putting the three together because I had written them sequentially. So like each one could end, but this is kind of how I write my series, whether people like it or not. Some people don't. Those will be my one-star reviews. Will be the this doesn't end. It didn't end. What the hell? It didn't end. I tie up everything going on in that one story line right there. The immediate story, and then it's kind of a serial. So it goes to the next and goes to the next. There's not a lot of time gap between. So yeah, we put it together and bundled it, and it sold like, I mean, it sold really well. And it's still up for sale now, even after Kindle Worlds was basically um,
Yeah.
destroyed or
Yeah.
taken
No,
away.
it didn't last long.
No, Blake was like, he's like, yeah, I'd love to keep this out there in the world, because it was a full novel. It was about 95,000 words, um, all three together. Um,
Yeah.
and I think at one point there was an audiobook, but we got rid of that because you can't really control the audiobook
No.
version of it. So
Man, 90 some thousand words. And I remember how much they were paying too per word. So that's
I loved
nice.
it. And it was
That's
it was
good.
a blast. It was a blast. I mean, I'm honest to God, I can honestly say, in terms of projects outside my own writing, that was probably the absolutely, without a doubt, the most rewarding thing I've done. And Blake sent me like some original sketches of like wayward of the town and the surrounding mountains and things. So I had a lot to work with because he I when I told him the scope of what I was planning to do, really show how they built the wall and how they did everything from the first exploration that even left the mountain. He was definitely pretty excited about that. So yeah,
Yeah.
and we're on as soon as we're done with this, I'm heading up to watch episode 8 of Dark Matter. I'm a little behind. I wish I things have been pretty busy, but
Yeah.
my wife and I are absolutely hooked. So obviously.
So do you so when you are, you you primarily do thrillers, right? Like you don't have any that are just standalones.
I don't. Yeah, I mean,
So
the
do they
Jakarta
start
pandemic.
as like standalones and then you just, or do you know from the beginning, like, okay, you know what, this is going to be the first book in a new series? And then in that case, do you have an idea, off the jump, it's going to be probably three books? I mean, do you already have kind of that arc in your head? Do you write that down? Do you outline any of those? I mean, especially, I guess, with a publisher now, usually if you're getting like a 2 book deal or 3 book deal or whatever else, they usually want to know, well, what are these books going to be? I mean, like how much do you have in your head when you're working or when you're starting these series? Like how, just how far are you going to go, or just basic idea, or I don't know.
Right. So the two true standalone books I've ever written are the Jakarta Pandemic, even though like those same characters I brought back in that world timeline 10 years later for 4 more books, you know. But that was a standalone. I had no intention of writing any more of those characters. I had no idea if that book would succeed or do anything, and it was kind of took on a life of its own. And also the first Black Flag book I wrote, I'm like, yeah, it was a weird time where I just hadn't read Clancy-ish, I hadn't read any kind of book that really resonated with me, and that was around 2010, 11. It for me, I don't know. It just I'm like writing that book was really more for me, as in like this is kind of what I envision as a start to a character. But once again, I didn't know if it would take off, if anyone would want to read it, and it could have ended and been a standalone. So yeah, those I think, I mean, and like I said, they didn't become standalones, but I do definitely right now. I always so for my publisher, I plan for 2 books, and I write those 2 books where they can end at book 2, and it will be a conclusive ending to everything that has gone on. But there's always a few little a few little what do you want to say, little trickles, little things that could go on and go into book 3, and that's typically what's happened. Like for Ryan Decker series, we actually went to book 4, which was kind of surprised me. That was they gave me the choice. They said, you don't have to, but if you want to write a book 4, we think that's fine. And I did that, and I had a good link, to do that with. And same with the Devin Gray series. Actually, I didn't think that we would do a book 3 in Devin Gray, but when I signed the contract for another 2 books, I said, let's do a book 3, and they gave the thumbs up to that. I said we just have to go back into book 2 and change like 5 paragraphs at the very end, kind of change the fate of the antagonist at the very end. I had him in the original version, he was killed in like in a highway ambush, but in carrying it on, he survived. it didn't take a lot to switch that around. And his fate wasn't great after that. He was basically put in a gulag, but he was removed from that in book three to carry out this other part of his plan that had been uncovered. So yeah, I try. Yeah, it's a tough balance, honestly. But I do write, like I said, two books and then hope for a third.
Are there times where you start working on, like, you're working on this new series right now? Do you ever get the itch to revisit a series that's like two or three series ago, where you're like, oh, you know what? I wish I could go back and do a book five or something.
Yeah, if I could freeze time right now, I'd write Fractured State 3. I have it's completely outlined, chapterized, ready to go. That was my first series with Thomas and Mercer, and it was a 35 years in the future, kind of what I call a near future dystopian book. So, it didn't really fit their catalog, as well. You know, it did so it did fine, but it didn't warrant a third book. So, I didn't get the third book contract for that, which left me kind of hanging, and I just didn't have time to. I'm still looking for that. Like I said, if I could freeze time for 4 months, I'd write that book, because that's actually one of my favorite series. Writing near future stuff where you have to think of near tech. I call it near tech. So stuff that's like close, recognizable enough, but not like too far fetched or too far out for people to grasp. That was like one of my favorite things to do in that series. All the different. I mean, back then again, when I look back, that was a while ago. That stuff's probably like now tech,
Yeah.
drone. Like seriously, some of these like purposeful drones, and who knows.
So you mentioned then outlining. Is that something that before you start writing, you really outline it first, or do you just have the main concept in your head, or is it kind of just a broad outline? You kind of know where. I always use the example Harlan Coben always talks about. For him, it's like he's like doing a cross country road trip. He knows where he's starting. He has he knows where he wants to end up. He's going to start in Jersey. He's going to go to California. How he gets there, what happens along the way. It'll be a surprise to him as much as it will be to the reader. But he really kind of has that finishing point in mind, or like, so like for you, I mean, like what has been your process, and has that been consistent over the years, or is that something that's also evolved, as you've done, 20 plus books?
Right, right. That's a great question, and I almost always know where it's going to end up. I feel like I know where the start is and I know where it's going to end. So like, in terms of Harlan Coben, it would match. But I spend a lot more time in between. Um, it doesn't always, I mean, to be honest, I mean, I used to use yellow stickies and all these. I used to have a very different system where it was more of a balancing system where I would identify all the different main players, organizations, not necessarily characters even, and I would yellow sticky scenes based on really like kind of just like a kind of a rough typing. I'll just type 10 pages of, what I think the book's going to be. And like these are potential scenes. But now, I'm a little more deliberate. I still do that big write out, um, but it's a little more thought out. And I don't do yellow stickies anymore. I'll do whiteboarding. And I have to say it's definitely not a roadmap, like a town to town roadmap. It's more of a region to region roadmap, if that makes sense. Like trying to use the Harlan Coben, trying to go with that theme of like, the beginning and the end of this long journey road trip. Um, Previously it was just literally like trying to balance out, does everyone get enough time? Is it and it worked. It actually kind of worked out, but as plots get more complex and more characters come in, and I found myself like really struggling to keep it all straight. So I'll have a whiteboard with all the characters, and I'll have a whiteboard with like like kind of like big picture roadmap. And then what I do is like I usually do 5 parts for each book. It's pretty typical for me. I mean, honestly, every book I've written ends up between 62 or 67 chapters, no matter how I, and it's not deliberate. It's not one of those things where I'm like, I set out and I say that. It just happens. Um, so each part I will really like kind of nail down, and I'll have two boards dedicated to just that part. And stuff gets cut, stuff gets added. I just try to make sense of it all on there. But honestly, I mean, I could probably just get rid of all that and be able to probably write the same story. Um, it does help in the long run for continuity's sake, because there are times I've written characters that are dead and they're suddenly alive, later in the book or in another book, and I'm like, oh shit. Did I really did that? And luckily the editors catch it. So like, having a good team be standing behind you is not a bad thing.
Um, so real quick, I actually did Google Dale Gribble, and going back to he says mentally picture Charlie Thornton as Dale Gribble. He's the dude from King of the Hill, the one with the hat and the sunglasses.
Oh, Charlie, so I'm okay. So I had it reversed. So Charlie Thornton being the character in the book, but Gribble
But he
is the
pictures Dale Gribble, yes.
yeah. And I'm trying to think. Like I really tried not to like characterize anyone in our neighborhood at that time. But yeah, no one matched him. I really, because like that the setting was so close to the neighborhood I lived in. But now that I'm gonna have to look it up. I don't want to do it right now. But yeah, kind of like a sort of a panicky over kind of an overreactor a little bit. Is that the character? Is that the Gribble character?
Let me
That's
pull
Charlie
the
Thornton. In
chat.
my mind, Charlie Thornton is this guy who's like
Here,
sided.
I put it. I put an image in the chat. Pull up the chat,
All right,
and
I'll have to
and
look
you
it up
can
real quick.
see you can see the guy, the character. As soon as you'll see him, you'll recognize. You'll be like, oh yeah, that's him. Because I haven't watched King of the Hill in forever. All right, so that
But it's him, but like I remember him as being kind of low key, like acting low key. He was always smoking a cigarette and you know like cool, like kind of a cool cucumber. And to whereas Charlie is like I envision him kind of looking like that, but being a little like just like a nervous wreck all the time about
yeah.
everything. That's funny.
Bennett says he's a wimpish right-wing conspiracy theorist.
What's that?
Bennett put a comment in saying he's a wimpish right-wing conspiracy theorist.
Okay. Yeah, that fits. So I guess that's right.
So let's talk a little bit about a clean kill. So this is a new series with a new character, a whole new characters. I mean, it's called a
Yeah.
Garrett Mann novel or thriller, but honestly, he has like a whole team. But obviously, he's the protagonist here. Um, how long has this idea been kind of percolating in your head, or is this one of those things where I mean, like, how long do some of these ideas kind of come to you? Do you write them down? You just kind of keep them in the back of your head for a while? Um, at what point do you feel like, okay, this is a character or this is a story that I really want to tell?
Yeah. So I started talking with my publisher about, just doing something a little different, kind of just going in a slightly different direction. And when you read the book, it ends up kind of it ends up right in my wheelhouse. But we really, they wanted to see if I could put some different elements in it. Um, looking to, you know, maybe appeal to, a broader audience. So um I had I don't know how long the idea has been brewing, but I put together like five or six different concepts and pitched them. And this was by far my favorite. So, maybe I put more detail into it. Maybe it was evident through my pitch that this was my favorite and that influenced it. But I loved, I've been reading and watching, but mainly reading the Slow Horses series, Mick Herron's. Um, the whole concept of kind of a misfit force, misfit group. And Garrett Mann's group is very different. They're not like, you know, complete utter rejects, just sequestered to a dingy building in, some side street of London. But there was a little bit of that was in the back of my head, creating this kind of force of people that, had a kind of an agenda. They've all been in some way or shape either harmed or affected by kidnapping, or serial killer, or some kind of like something pretty traumatic like that, abductions, and a few that have just kind of fallen out of favor with the FBI for a variety of various reasons. you know Maybe they didn't have anything that happened personally in their life, but while on the job they felt compelled to act when they saw something similar, like like a kidnapping or abduction, or a murder, and then they went above the law. They got in a lot of trouble, so they find themselves. Garrett Mann collects these people and has this kind of odd task force that is essentially traveling the southwest of the U.S. On the trail of a rather prolific serial killer. He has a team, or he has a liaison from Mexico, a former Mexican Chihuahua state cop, which is that's like the Ciudad Juarez area. So she lost, I'm trying to think, her mother when she was very young, and somehow got connected with Garrett Mann at a conference in Mexico on this kind of international violence. And long story short, they're working together with this group of misfits, and she's sort of posing as an FBI agent. They try to avoid her, saying that, but the book starts out with this serial killer slipping up, and the task force, just gets right on his tail, and the action and everything, everything just kind of picks up from there. So there's a lot of backstory to a lot of the characters, but it all starts with this, kind of late night slip up, kind of a random encounter with a local cop, and ends up in a underground facility in New Mexico that I would like to think would blow people's minds. And I don't want to give away any more, but it was a lot. It was a kind of a crazy journey for me to kind of go from that roadside encounter to the finale.
And so again, is that something where in even these backgrounds of these characters, did you really have that fleshed out before you dove in, or it was more as you were writing, there are certain things about the characters maybe you weren't even anticipating? And even the same thing too with where where it does start with the with the was it the deputy kind of just on the road.
Yeah.
Like did you know exactly like in that New Mexico place, or I mean again, how much of this book did you have in your head when when you sat down to write page one?
Yeah, I knew, the New Mexico angle, and that I knew that existed. I didn't know exactly what it was, so that's something that sort of developed, over the course of the, novel, but that came pretty quick. I mean, I knew that's where they were going to end up. I just didn't know who was going to end up there and how. That's kind of how I operate. Like, I don't have it plotted out all the way. The roadmap isn't completely clear, and bringing in the additional people from Mexico. It's a complicated cast, when you think about it. And I'll tell you, I lost track of it at some point. I had to go back, reread, see who was who, especially for book two, like even like who was dead, who was alive. 'Cause
All right, Steve. I feel
I'm
like I need to
curious.
have an intervention with you because
Yeah,
I feel I mean I know like I mean I don't really practice what
terrible.
what I preach, but I really do try to as I'm writing kind of at least keep even in like on my Mac the notes app just kind of keep a little bit of a thing like who the character is, maybe some characteristics. If they die, that's something that I would make notice. So
You think, and I cross their name, and the thing is, like, I have a whiteboard, and as they die, and like that's you bring up a good point. I have no idea who's going to die at
yeah.
any given moment, at any point in these novels. Honestly, I don't say, oh, this one's gonna die, that one's gonna die, that one's gonna die, that one's gonna die. It's truly, I mean, it's gonna be a red shirt, as you say, the Star Trek red shirt. It's very unlikely to be one of the main characters, although, I have pushed that boundary a number of times lately. In a book two, definitely. There's some surprises in that. But yeah, no, I do that, and I always tell myself, take a picture of the whiteboard. But sometimes, like when I finish a book, I get so excited, I just wipe the whole damn thing clean, and then I sit there going, shit. Like there was a lot of information on that on that board, and I just literally just erased, like, 6 months of all these arrows pointing here and there and all this information. So I have to go back and read, like, his this one. Yeah, no, I haven't learned. Yeah, intervention would be great. It's,
All right, yeah. Here's my remedy for you. Okay, buy yourself one of those new big iPads. It'll be a business expense, and then I think they have something on there. The same thing with, like, you can just, like, write. It has the pen. You can
it's
just write
fun.
everything, and then it saves it. So so you know what I mean. You can always come back then on the next book. It's gonna be
Yeah,
there.
yeah. No, I'm just like turn around, like, I'll take a picture of this, or I won't. So yeah, no.
So all right. So let me ask you this.
But
So
the thing is, I know when
yeah,
something's off. I'm like, I don't think this person's still this, and it's never a major character. It's like
right.
one of these ancillary team people. And some of these scenes are just so damn complicated. Like people in 8 different houses and doing all this stuff. I'm like shit. I'm like, I think, yeah.
So, how much time do you spend? Okay, well, first of all, I mean, are you writing every day? If so, do you try to write, a chapter, two chapters? I mean, how many words? Is there a certain, or is it kind of just, day by day?
It's so I'm like, once again, you're going to be looking at intervention time here. Um, and my wife too. She's tried to intervene several times and it hasn't worked. So maybe don't waste your time on it. Um, don't send the team here to have a talk with me. Um, I'm like a total deadline cruncher, and I've tried to, like, as of late I've kind of worked my schedule where I always have a deadline in May or early June. I like to take the summer off, but it's not like I don't write, I don't plot, I don't do stuff like that. So, but I'm not writing every day in the summer. So in between books, I have a tendency to take probably way too long, um, way too much time off, um, which, doesn't work out for me because, but I just, it's hard to describe. I'm kind of like a crunch deadline writer. I love that last month. Um, a month before that, the 2 months out, I'm like working steadily. And
But then,
prior
I
to
mean, are you
that,
doing like, 10, 12-hour days? I mean, what does that mean? Like, the
so
closer you're
like
getting
so
into?
for the last month, I'm like, my wife's like, you're killing yourself. She's like,
Yeah.
you're literally up at dawn. You're in the office till 10. And I take breaks. It's not like I don't get up. I walk, I have dinner and I do all these things. I do the normal, I have a normal life, but I'm in there way more than I should be if I just would spread this out. But it's funny, like the ideas just don't, I find that that last month is like really the most productive and most creative for me. And, and I just don't know how to change that. Um, month two is a very foundational month for me. So 2 months out, very, very foundational. That will set the groundwork for that crunch month. And prior to that, everything is kind of like, a little bit here and there, 1,000 words a day, 500, maybe, 2 days of exploring characters, plotting, researching. Um, in the month before that, even lighter. So, I mean, I really write a book in like I would say 4 months. So
And
it's that seems to be pretty typical for me.
how
And the
many
last
books are you doing now, like per year?
roughly two.
So two books, so about
Maybe
eight
one,
months.
maybe one and a half, maybe one and a half, really, honestly, because like I said, I haven't done anything this summer. Um, you know, yeah, I'm
So
doing
how
dev
many
ed.
drafts do you end up doing like before it gets to your, to the editor? I mean, do you do something where you do maybe like your first draft and then I think you mentioned earlier that like your wife is she still kind of like your first reader? I mean, at what point do does it get to like the publisher and then goes through their editing process? And I mean, I guess like I don't know, like do you ever find yourself just I mean,
No, I,
how is it one of those things that like once you turn it in, it's like, okay, they come back with some copy edits, some suggestions, okay, boom, 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 done. Or like, are you just still like combing through it? I mean, how much do you get into that thing before crunch time?
no, yeah, great. That's a great question because I think I do it very differently. Maybe because I hear people are like, themselves before they're even showing it to anyone. I'm on my eighth draft, and I'm like, I got one draft, and this goes out the door. And I
Well,
do
it's
comb
because
through.
you finish right before it's due. You have to
Correct.
get it out there.
Well, no, no. Well, that's true, and I think it is. My dev edits, you know, I mean, I'm not writing complicated. I'm not writing, literary fiction.
Right.
Not writing, but these are. It's not like these aren't complicated books, with a lot of plot. I mean, plot subplots, you know, multiple characters. I mean, I look at it as it's a fairly complicated process. But I think that 6 month, I build up over the 6 months, and I do exactly what you say. I comb through, and this is why I spend so much time in the day. Because I mean, actual writing, like no kidding, new words. I don't think I ever spend more than 3 to 4 hours a day on that. So when
So are
I
you
turn
kind
it
of editing going back as you're going?
right, and I go back and back and back, and it's a long process. And honestly, I hear people who are like, "Oh, I got my dev edit. This is gonna be a long 3 months." I'm like, 3 months, 3 days. I mean, seriously. I mean, I think I've spent a total of a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks on a dev edit before on all of my like all my published books and copy edit and proofing. They're like, oh, I got copy edits. This is going to be a long 3 weeks. So like 2 hours. I mean, like literally just like, what is there? I feel like I'm not, this is not a brag thing at all because I could be totally full of shit, to be honest. And like I said, I'm not writing this fiction where every word is scrutinized for perfection, like literary fiction. But, I just, I feel like everything is solid when I turn it in, or I wouldn't turn it in and I'd ask for more time. And I have asked for a few more days here and there, but it's pretty rare. When I get to that end, I feel pretty good about it. This last book, like actually just today, I did an edit. I was rereading, and I'm like, I didn't like the opening chapter. It had some elements in there. I'm like, this might alienate some readers. Not political, just something I don't want to bring it up. But that was very rare for me to actually go back this late and say, I'm gonna zap a couple paragraphs and change a couple things. And I hadn't gotten to the copy editing phase yet, so we're in good shape to do that, and they'll have some people look at it and make sure it makes sense. But no, it's funny. I just feel like and it's always been like this, where I'm always, I'm a deadline writer, and I think there's a reason for that, because I can't finish 2 months ahead of time, turn it in, and then or work on a second or third or fourth or fifth or 10th or eighth draft. So I went back in numbers. It should have been 12, but it's a totally different world. If I was shooting for the stars, I probably would spend a lot more time and spend a lot more drafts. And, having it, if I had, having an agent or some, another person who's really like kind of like combing through this, I could see that happening, but I kind of like the
Do,
way it works.
do you have an agent or are you just dealing with them directly?
No, I'm just dealing with them directly, which,
Interesting.
yeah, no, why would I at this point? yeah, I've been, our relationship has been fantastic. And I just
Even
pitched direct.
for potentially foreign stuff, film, TV. We can talk off screen, or we
Yeah,
can
we can
talk
talk
off
off.
we can
Yeah, we
talk
can talk off
offline.
screen about
But
that.
anyway,
Yeah.
all right. So what about number? Okay, so book two, obviously, book one leaves it open for book two. Is there anything? I mean, what can you give us a little bit of a sneak preview without giving any spoilers?
For book two.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, book two will definitely bring things to Washington, D.C. It's essentially the epicenter of the entire project. Which becomes, it's fairly obvious at the end of the book at the end of book one that, you know, this whole facility is clearly funded by, some dark money. And yeah, they kind of track that down, and it gets more and my biggest challenge is like topping the last. I don't have to top the last series, but topping the last book and everything that goes on there gets harder and harder. And I do feel an obligation to like, top the last series. So I don't know how much I don't know how many more of these I can write because it's like, the Ryan Decker series is a great example. 4 books, and like, how do I keep how do I at least meet the same level of the last book, maybe expand, go a little higher, and then within each book keep ratcheting it up because I love the big finale, the big yeah, I mean it's hard, because sometimes I'm like looking at the third. I kind of do it, I don't know, a little differently. There's always one big bump. Second, third's pretty high, and then the fourth one is the big one. And I think like I I've never taken a writing class or done any of those like schematics, where they talk about like the different rises and falls. But I think it's usually a 3 part, and I like to do the 4 part because I just love writing those scenes. And sometimes I finish the third and I'm like, man, you've really kind of painted yourself in a corner here with how you're gonna make this, make the finale even better than that. Because nothing's worse than a flat out, all right, that guy ran across the street, shot him, and that's it. It's all done. Yeah.
So you had mentioned that your wife was like your first reader, and we were talking earlier. Has that been announced, her deal? Can we talk a little bit about that or not?
I
Has she
mean, we
signed
can
the contract?
yeah, it's all signed. Yeah,
Okay.
she's yeah.
So essentially, I mean, we're not going to get too much into it, but essentially she's a writer herself. She wrote a book, it's going to be published. So now you're married to a writer who also reads your stuff. I'm assuming you read her stuff.
I do.
Does
Yeah.
that get like how's that? You know what I mean? Like, you know what I
It's
mean?
kind
Like
of
how
funny
like I mean
because
is does that create some like extra tension at home? Are there times where, if you guys are really honest with each other about certain things where it's just like, you're sleeping on the couch? I mean, like how's that working out?
I just got a new air mattress at Walmart today. No, no, it's been a it's been an interesting process because she has I won't give the pen name, but she has written before in the post-apocalyptic genre. She wrote 6 books, on the heels of me writing them because she had copy edited and dev edited all my other books, so she felt very comfortable writing in that genre. I can't say although we talked, she's like, I actually kind of enjoyed it. It's a fairly simple world kind of to write in. Um, but anyway, so she's an attorney, and she's a former Navy JAG. So her new series is based around that kind of an experience, a former Navy JAG. And without getting into details, it's they're basically crime thriller um, novels with, a very solid legal angle, obviously, but where she hops between the two worlds, being a JAG and being a civilian attorney. But yeah, no, I mean, it's funny because she has been, and depending on how busy we are in our lives and what's going on, she either has the time to really dev edit and do mine. And because I'm a deadline writer, like like a jerk, it's hard for her because, how is she going to do that? If I turn this in, she can read it along the way, and she has in the past identified, plot holes and big picture stuff. Um, and it's been very helpful. A lot of my self-published stuff, really, and also the stuff with Thomas and Mercer. But life has been so busy that a little bit less of that over the years. But now, now that I'm reading her stuff, and I'm the worst dev editor on the planet. Like I just wouldn't. This would not be my thing. Like I'm more of a copy editor, I think. I'm a little more like about the mechanics. So like we'll have a discussion, and like 3 days later, she's like, the other day you said, this about that. And like that kind of contrasted with what you said like 8 days ago. And like I'm convinced women just have like very good memories. And like I don't know if it's a very good memories of things. And I'm sitting there going, I don't even know what I said 3 days ago. But anyways, well, yeah, let's have a discussion about it. But no, I want to, it doesn't really cause any strife because what I've learned from her she helped me from very early on to understand the concept of critique, because I had like Pulitzer Prize, even though I say I expected nothing, I had that kind of Pulitzer Prize winning syndrome, where like she would, critique or say something about, I think maybe this should, I don't know if that's really the right way to go about that angle with that character, or like that seemed kind of out of character for them, or any of a million different things. I'd be like, I'm the one writing. How do you know? I'm the writer here. That lasted like 2 books until I realized she has a really good knack for the big picture, very big picture stuff, and it's been extremely beneficial over the years. So I try to help her out as best as I can. I don't know how good of a job I'm doing, because like I said, I have a tendency to contradict myself, without explaining it. There's a reason for it, but I'm not explaining it well to her.
Yeah. No, no,
So,
no,
so
that's fine. So we're coming up on an hour now. I don't want to keep
yeah.
much more of your time, but Bennett did chime in again. He said he's certainly hooked on the larger conspiracy setup in a clean kill. Curious if more will be fleshed out with the killer's victims, motives, and what made him so
Yeah.
critical to the program. I don't want to name the program for people who haven't read the book yet, but for the program, is there anything you want to
Oh, definitely. Yeah. There's so much more. There was a very definitive purpose for them being there, um, to create a bigger, they're instrumental in the foundation of this greater conspiracy. So yeah.
Yeah, good. And then, so if you could go back to, the very first novel you had written, besides warning yourself that there would be a pandemic that a lot of people wouldn't take seriously anyway, like, writing wise, is like, what would you, I mean, what would you say that you've really learned writing wise or even business wise that you wish you probably would have known earlier that you feel kind of would have helped you out of the gate?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it does seem like a lot of people get it, or most authors get it. I mean, I would have spent, I would have invested it if I hate to say like if I had believed in myself. I mean, it's not that I didn't believe. I was kind of just writing for fun with very little expectations. And I didn't pursue an agent or anything like that. I just self-published it. I remember I think back in the day, like I might have read some of Joe Conrath's blogs about self-publishing. I mean, to, blast from the past in terms of names. And
Well, I mean, there was a gold rush. I don't know, if we had this
oh no,
discussion at
no,
BoucherCon last year, but there was definitely, I feel
yeah,
like back in the day, there was this gold rush where you could upload a book, sell thousands without doing anything. I mean, those days are way gone. But yeah, I mean, back then, I mean, some of these authors were crazy money, and honestly, a lot of these authors you never even hear from them anymore.
no, no. I mean, so many. I mean, I can't even remember most of their names, honestly. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I will say, like, I feel very fortunate to have started then, because self-publishing, definitely there was a bit of a gold rush back then. But like, if I could go back, I would have done it very professionally, because I think it would have sold even better. I think it would have been, it would have looked less like like a pet project. But I think everyone's kind of gotten that message now. I mean, from what I've seen, and back then the advertising, there wasn't these advertising routes weren't available, like Amazon, AMS, and I mean, maybe Facebook, but it just I would have just put out a much more professional product, with real editing. But that's like hindsight, because like I said, I gotta, you know, turn to my wife and say, hey, I'm gonna spend $3,000 on, professional proofing, copy editing, a good, a cover. She probably would have looked at me like, sounds great. Pursue your fantasy. It wasn't until like it was kind of became obvious, like this is actually working out. This has potential. Again, it took me 3 years to 2010, and I left my full-time job in 2013. So it wasn't that long, but I published, well, 5 books total, and replaced my regular income. But it was the gold rush era. I mean, these days you have to have a polished, slick product and some backing behind you, or it's just not going to get seen, I don't think. And
Yeah.
published like 5 books a year, which I was doing 2 a year back then, which was a lot for me. But I don't know, some of these authors, they managed to crank it out, and I mean, I think unless you're doing that these days, self-publishing would be really a difficult route.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other live stream. So, Steve, thanks again
Totally.
for hanging out. For everybody who was checking in and watching us live, the book is A Clean Kill. It's out, Amazon Publishing, available in, ebook, audio, paperback. The second book is going to be out when?
Good question. I think no, July of next year, somewhere
Oh,
around
okay. Oh, wow. Okay.
there. Yeah, it's a year out. Yeah, it's called A Hired Kill. So
All right.
yeah.
All right. So again, Steve, thanks for hanging out, and everybody, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Yeah.